Terrorists have no religion and terrorism has no boundaries.
Here to give you an overview of the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Act 1999, known as the MCOCA. It is said that terrorists have no religion and terrorism have no boundaries. Before starting, I would like to state that the detailed lecture which is being given right now shall be recorded and uploaded on my YouTube as well as my Instagram page, the link of which shall be given in the chat box. Also, the notes of the lecture are going to be provided to Advocate Nisha or Advocate Mahesh Vaswani. Kindly contact them if you want the notes, and these notes are free and there is no charge for them. This webinar is free and there is no charge for them. With this, I begin my lecture. I again state that terrorists have no religion and terrorism has no boundary. The primary objective of an effective counter-terrorism is to safeguard humans, strengthen democracy, and uphold the rule of law. Terrorism has immensely affected India. The reasons of terrorism in India may vary from religion to geography to caste and history. The Honorable Supreme Court in Kartar Singh versus State of Punjab has observed that the country has been in firm grip of spiraling terrorist violence and is caught in deadly pangs of disruptive activities. The MCOCA was specifically enacted to deal with the rising crime in Maharashtra and especially Mumbai due to underworld. The article and the lecture today shall give you a detailed view of the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Act, commonly known as the MCOCA. I would like to stop here for a moment and I would like to tell you all it is unable for me to rotate the screen because the phone is on a stand, and hence I have told that the lecture will be uploaded on YouTube as well as my Instagram page for everyone to view. Let us now begin. What was the idea behind implementing the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime? Organized crime is a category of transnational, national, and local grouping, highly centralized enterprises run by criminals who tend to engage into illegal activities that are planned and controlled by powerful enterprises on a large scale are called organized crime. Syndicate and gangs practice organized crime as a profession. This means that every syndicate or crime, they have small people employed to commit crimes on their behalf, and they run the entire syndicate. Now, unlawful activities may include terrorism, theft, prostitution, robbery, drug trafficking, human trafficking, forced labor, and all of this is collectively practiced by a group of people, and hence it is known as an organized crime. Organized crime is nowhere defined in the Indian Penal Code. Due to the lack of legislation for organized crimes, and especially Mumbai being the economical capital of India, it was seen that Mumbai was targeted center for criminals for earning money or to hoard money from people. So the need was felt by the state of Maharashtra to enact a law dealing with organized crimes to curb the menace of terror and syndicate of gangs. Maharashtra is the first Indian state which has implemented a consolidated organized crime act. After the repealing of TADA and POTA, it was found necessary that some act is necessary. Now let us see what was the ordinance which the Maharashtra government gave for the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Ordinance 1999, that is the MOCA. The 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution empowers the state government to make laws in order to maintain public order and security of the state. Since the menace of organized crime was increasing in Maharashtra, an ordinance, namely the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Ordinance 1999, was brought in by the governor on 24th February 1999. Since the legislature was not in session, it was necessary and expedient to replace the ordinance by the governor into an act by the state legislature for an effective implementation and adjudication of the offences committed. The ordinance received the President's assent on 23rd April 1999 as per Article 254 of the Indian Constitution, and it was published in the official gazette on 24th April 1999. The act was deemed to be implemented from 24th February 1999 when the ordinance was promulgated. Now let us see what is the jurisdiction of the MCOCA. The act initially was applicable only to the state of Maharashtra, But thereafter, after the amendment in the year 2002, it extended also to the national capital, that is Delhi. Now, which other states in India have organized crimes laws apart from Maharashtra? Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka, Haryana, Andhra Pradesh have special laws in place dealing with organized crimes. Now, let us see what is an organized crime, because organized crime is the base or genesis of the NCOCA Act. Organized crime is defined under Section 2E of the Act. I'm reading out the definition precisely. Organized crimes means that any continuing unlawful activity by an individual singly, jointly, either as a member of the organized crime syndicate or on behalf of such a syndicate. Understand, it has to be a crime that is an unlawful activity which is committed by a person either individually, singly, jointly, but on behalf of the member of such a syndicate by use of violence or threat of violence or intimidation or coercion or other unlawful means with the objective of gaining pecuniary gains, that is monetary gains, or gaining undue economic or other advantage to himself or any person promoting the insurgency. Thus, in short, it means that an organized crime means an activity which is committed by a person either alone, jointly, or with a group of people to gain certain unlawful privilege. To be precise now, the word organized means crime committed by a single person in a planned way. The crime committed by a single person in a planned way. There has to be a planning. Planning is the second ingredient. That the first ingredient is it has to be an crime, and secondly there has to be a planning. Organized crime syndicate means a group of two or more persons acting either as singly or collectively as a syndicate of gangs who indulge in organized crime. Now let us see what is the definition of continuing unlawful activity. As stated in the Act, continuing unlawful activity means an activity which is prohibited by the law for the time being in force, which is a cognizable offense punishable with imprisonments of 3 or more years, undertaken again either singly or jointly or as a member of an organized crime syndicate or on behalf of such syndicate, in respect of which also there has to be more than one charge sheet filed in the competent court in the preceding 10 years to attract the provisions of the NCOCA Act. Continuing unlawful activity is a prerequisite condition to establish crime under MCOCA. Let me give an example here. A, B, C, D decide to rob a bank. A, B, C are first time a part of the crime, but there is a charge sheet against D in the previous 10 years. There is a charge sheet against D in the previous 10 years for a similar crime. Then only a crime under the MCOCA. Can be booked. Understand, there should be an continuous unlawful activity. If the crime is first time in commission, then that cannot be said to be an offense under the MCOCA Act. Now let us see what does an organized crime syndicate mean. An organized crime syndicate means a group of 2 or more people. It could be either 2 people or more people who are again acting singly, collectively as a syndicate to indulge into activities to form an organized crime. So we have seen what is an organized crime, what is an continuing unlawful activity, and what is a syndicate. Now let us see what are the punishment. As per Section 3, that is Section 3(1) of the Act, deals with the punishment of the offense. I am again reading out the section here. If a person commits the offense of an organized crime and that results into death of a person, such offender may be punished with the sentence of life imprisonment along with minimum fine of ₹1 lakh. In other cases, the offender shall be punished for more than 5 years, which may extend to life imprisonment along with fine of ₹5 lakhs. As per Section 20, when a person has been convicted under this Act, the court, along with the imprisonment and fine, can also declare that the movable or immovable property belong to the convict is forfeited by the state government. Understand, this is something different. This is something different. That section 20 states that along with imprisonment and fine, the property of the said person can also be forfeited by the government. I request everyone to please mute your mics. Participants, please mute your mics. Now proceeding further, after what is the punishment for the actual act, there comes what is the punishment for attempting or abetting the offense under the MCOCA Act. As per section 3(2) of the Act, whoever conspires to commit an organized crime or helps in the preparation of the organized crime or abets the crime shall be punished for an imprisonment which shall not be less than 5 years but may extend up to life, along with a fine for 5 lakhs. Example, the same punishment can be imposed on anybody who harbors or conceals or attempts in harbor or concealing the crime. So understand. May I please request everyone to mute your mics? Mr. Javed, please mute your mic.
Okay, ma'am.
So we have gone through section 3(2). Section 3(2) lays down for punishment for attempting and abetting of the crime. Further, the Act defines that section 3(3) states that any person who harbors or conceals the attempt shall also be punished. The punishment shall be levied on an individual if he is proved that he is a member of the organized crime as per section 3(4). So this states that section 3(1) says that punishment can be given for actual commission of the crime. 3(2) states that whoever abets or attempts in commission of the crime, and 3(3) says that whoever conceals the crime, and 3(4) says that merely being a member of the organized crime can also attract punishment. Members, please mute yourself, please. It's a request. Kindly do not unmute yourself. Now, after this, let us see what is the definition of the term abet, because it is very essential to know what constitutes to an offense of abetment or not. The section 2(a) of the MCOC Act defines the term abet. Abet means the communication or association with any person with the actual knowledge or having reason to believe that such a person is engaged in assisting in any manner an organized crime syndicate. This means that if in any manner a person assists a syndicate, then he can be termed as an abettor. The passing on or publication of, without any lawful authority, any information likely to assist the organized crime syndicate, and the passing on or publication or distribution of any document or matter obtained from the organized crime syndicate and of the documents so obtained from the organized crime syndicate. So this means that abetment, this means that the abetment says that having actual knowledge that any person is engaged in doing a crime and yet continuing to be a part of that is abetment. And secondly, passing off any information, knowing to that information to be an information which will be helpful for the syndicate. Now, section 3(5) deals with the punishment for an individual who possesses the property obtained from an organized crime. For example, I have raided a particular bank or looted a particular bank, and from the lockers I take certain diamonds. Unknowingly, I sell it to B person. Now, what would be the punishment that would be inflicted upon B? As per section 3(5) of the Act, if anybody holds property from the commission of the organized crime or has been acquired from the syndicate funds, so even if the property is taken from the money which the syndicate has looted or extorted, then that person shall be imprisoned to punishment which is not less than 3 years, which may again extend to life, and fine which may not be less than 2 lakh rupees. So the Stolen property here says that 3(5) punishes those people who have the property. Now I'm going to give you an illustration which will clearly say that. Now A is a driver hired by H, and H is a member of the crime syndicate. A is the driver who's helping the family members of H to go to and fro to market, school, shopping places, and everything. Now A is aware that H is a member of the syndicate, but A has never driven H to any place where he has held meetings with the syndicate, where he has committed any other actions. One day, H asks A to drive him to a bank. Unaware of the intentions of H, A drives H to the bank and A waits outside. H goes inside the bank and shoots a person in a bank, for example, a builder. Then will A be liable because H has shooted a person in the bank? No, A will not be liable because the A has not committed an offense because he did not have the knowledge that H would commit the murder of the builder. Secondly, even though he knew the nature of the crime committed by the syndicate, he was not involved in the murder of the builder because he came to know the same only after the act was committed. His involvement was not there. Hence, A would not be liable under the MCOCA Act. So understand clearly, in order to be liable for an offense under an MCOCA Act, it is essential to know that you are a member of the syndicate, you are aware that a particular crime is being committed, and in spite of knowing this, you still continue to aid the main offender. Now, for this, it is very essential to know what does the term member mean. The term member has not been defined anywhere in the Act. Membership is a floating concept. The fact that an individual is associated with a particular gang for more than 2-3 years is enough to establish that he is a member of a particular gang. Membership is a concept that appears to have been deliberately left from the interpretation because anybody who is associated with the gang and is involved should be termed to be their member only on the basis of a particular case, that is the facts of a particular case. Therefore, if a person is not actually associated with the crime, he will not be punished. In order to be a member, it is essential there is that a long association of more than 1 year or 2 years is there with the particular group, and the commission of the activities of the group are known. But if a person is found to be associated with a gang by providing any aid to the gang, like monetary aid or any house help or any giving shelter, then that person is considered to be the member of the organized system. Now, what are the courts who are entitled to look after the offense under the MCOCA? Special courts. As per section 5 and 6 of the Act, it provides for appointment of special courts. The government may, with a notification in the official gazette, constitute one or more special court in concurrence with the Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court. Any offense committed under this Act is triable by the court within whose jurisdiction the offense was committed or has been notified by the state government in the official gazette. Thus, only special courts have powers to try offences under the MCOCA. The power to decide the jurisdiction of the special court lies with the state government. If at all any dispute is there, the state government would be the final authority to decide the power of the special court. The decision of the state government is final and would be binding on everyone. And any session judge can try the cases under the MOCA. Only the judge has to be appointed by the special notification by the government. Now, powers of the special court. Section 7 of the MCOCA deals with the powers that are vested upon the special court and how the special court can try the accused under this Act or any law under the CRPC or any offense thereof. It is stated that the trial would be conducted same as a sessions trial, and if an accused is found guilty, the court may punish him as per the provisions of any act or any law as the case may be. Now, what are the powers and the procedure the special courts have to follow? Section 9 states that the special court may take this is very worthy to note. Please note down. Section 9 states that special court may take cognizance of an offense without the accused being committed to trial. Please note, without the accused being committed to trial, upon receiving a complaint based upon reliable facts, where the punishment for the offense is not more than 3 years or fine or both. The provisions in section 263 to 65 of the Criminal Procedure Code shall apply to such trial. This means that a special court, upon receipt or information wherein an accused are not before him, can also take cognizance of the said offense. The special court is mentioned in the law has a power to try the offences as same as the sessions court, and shall try the matter as if it was a sessions trial, and the procedure that has to be followed will be the same as that is prescribed in the Criminal Procedure Code for the trial of the session. Section 10 states that the trial of the offense. Okay, now this is again there. Section 10 states that the trial of the offense under the special courts will have precedence against the accused in any other court. For example, if two trials are going on against one accused, one is under section 376 and one is under the MCOCA, then the trial under the MCOCA shall be given preference and prioritized over the other trials. Now, what are the appeals which can be made before against the orders of the special court? Section 12 states that an appeal relating to sentence, judgment, or any order passed by the special court lies only with the High Court, and an appeal has to be made within 30 days of the sentence, judgment, or the order that has been delivered. No appeal can be made of interlocutory order. No appeal can be made of an interlocutory order. Whether the case can be transferred from a special court to regular court. Section 11 states that after taking cognizance of the offense, if the special court is of the opinion that it does not have jurisdiction to try the offense under the CRPC, then the court may transfer the case to any other court which has jurisdiction to try the case. Just pausing for a moment here. A case under MCOCA is going on before the Sessions Court, and discharge is filed on behalf of the accused. The court is of the view that a particular accused is not to be prosecuted under the MCOCA, and the court pronounces that the accused has been discharged from the MCOCA. Then it is the duty of the accused to apply to the principal judge of the court and separate his trial from the other accused against whom the MCOCA trial is going on. So a trial of an accused against whom MOCA is not available has to be conducted separately. Now, what are the facts that the court has to take into account while dealing the trials of the MCOCA? For the purpose of trial under this act, the court may take into consideration the fact that on previous occasion the accused was bound under section 107 or section 110 of the Criminal Procedure Code, or he was detained under any law relating to punitive detention, or previous occasion was prosecuted by any special act under this act. The court has to consider these facts whether the accused was previously an accused. When a person involved in an organized crime acts in behalf or is in possession of movable or immovable property which he could not satisfactorily account for. For example, an accused is having possession of a bungalow and is unable to give an account of that bungalow. The court may presume that the activity or such possession of the property has been acquired by illegal means. When an accused is unable to give his account before the court will presume that the same has been acquired by illegal means. Where it is provided that it is proved that the accused has kidnapped or abducted the person, it shall be presumed that such kidnap or abduction was for the purpose of ransom. This section is section which says about the factors that the court has to take into account is contrary to the legal principle of innocent until proven guilty. Now the next is section 8. Who shall conduct a trial under MCOCA? A public prosecutor is entitled as per section 8 to conduct a trial under the MCOC. A state government may appoint public prosecutor for conduction of this trial. Every advocate or any advocate is eligible to become a public prosecutor or an additional public prosecutor or a special public prosecutor, and who has been practicing as an advocate for not less than 10 years. Only the prosecutor has to be appointed by the government for conduction of trials under MCOC. Thus, it is mandatory for conducting trial under MCOC. The appointment has to come from the government, and it should be a lawyer whose practice is more than 10 years. Now, what is the law relating to protection of witness in the MCOCA Act? As per section 19, there is a provision for in-camera proceedings of the MCOCA trials. If the special court decides that keeping the identity and addresses of the witness is secret, it is generally seen that whatever MCOCA trials we are conducting, when we are supposed to cross-examine a witness or when we are supposed to attend the proceedings, the court gives us number that today page number so and so witness is to be examined, and only what we would call he's a pancho or he's a witness. The name of the witness of the proceedings in MCOCA trials is never disclosed to the general public. The charge sheet that is supplied to the accused is also a truncated charge sheet. Truncated charge sheet means the name, the address, and the details of the witness have been wiped out from the charge sheet. Thus, it provides that all the witnesses as per section 19 of the MCOCA are protected and their identity is not revealed. Now, let us, after we have seen the formation of the court, how the trial is conducted. Now, let us move to the next section, that is investigation. Now, who is supposed to investigate? Who is supposed to take cognizance of the offense? And all is detailed, and that is necessary. Section 23 of the Act states that no information of the commission of the offense under this Act would be recorded by a police officer without the prior approval of a police officer not below the rank of Deputy General of Police. In the commissionerate area, generally it is the Joint Commissioner Law and Order, or it is the Commissioner of Police, or the Joint Commissioner Crime. In the rural areas, it is the DYSP or the Superintendent of Police. Now let us see who shall conduct the investigation. The investigation of the offense shall be conducted by an officer who is not below the rank of the Deputy Superintendent of Police, that is the DSP, and in the commissionerate area, it is the DCP. The special court can take cognizance of the offense only with the sanction of the police officer not below the rank of an ADGP, that is the Additional Director General of Police. Now, how do informations come to police? Now, informations come to police when there are certain transcriptions done. Section 13 of the Act deals with appointment of a competent authority. Why isn't competent authority necessary here? A competent authority herein is necessary because the competent authority here is an authorized person to intercept the wire, electronic, or oral communications of a person. Now let us see what does section 13 say about appointment of competent authority. The state government may appoint any officer of the Home Department not below the rank of a secretary to the government to be the competent authority for interception of wire, electronic, or oral communication. What is interception of communications? Interceptions of communications means that recording communications between two people, or either they are telephonic, they are electronic, or oral. So the competent authority will intercept the communication and based on that try to extract any information. Now section 14 deals with authorization of interception of wire, electronic, and oral communication. The competent authority, after and written application received from the supervising officer of the investigation, only when a written application is there and that officer is not below the superintendent of police, that is the SP in the rural area and the commissioner of police in the in the commissionerate areas may order the approve or usage of interception of wire, electronic or oral communication when such usage may provide evidence for for the offense of organized crimes. Thus, only upon and written application of an officer the communication can be intercepted when it is going to be an essential part of evidence in the organized crime. The application should contain all the detail, and the format of the application is given at the end of act. Now, section 15 deals with constitution of a review committee for review of authorization order. This section has a provision for the constitution of review committee. Every order passed by the competent authority shall be reviewed by the review committee. The review committee consists of one chairman, that is an ex-official, and two ex-officio members. The chairman of the committee will be the secretary to the state. The two other members would be the additional chief secretary or the senior most chief secretary in the home department, and the principal secretary or secretary of legal affairs. The review committee within 10 days of the receipt of the order should decide and approve or reject the order passed by the competent authority. Thus, every order of the competent authority comes under the review of the review committee. If the order is rejected when the order authorizing interception of wire has been passed by the competent authority, the interception, if commenced, shall be discontinued forthwith, and information received shall not be admissible in evidence. Thus, it is advisable till the receipt of the order. It is till the receipt of the order and confirmation of the review, the interception should not start. Section 16 deals with interception and disclosure of wire, electronic or oral communication is prohibited. If any police officer, as otherwise mentioned in section 14, intercepts to up to 1 year and fine up to 50,000 rupees. Thus, apart from an authorized person, no other person can intercept the community. An annual report of details of when in which approved or the number of application or rejected. Thirdly, the number sorry, now I will start again. So we were on the number of applications that have been rejected. After that, there should be details of the number of applications which have been rejected and about which the interceptions have been carried out. The state interception should be submitted to the state government. The state government shall lay participants, please mute yourselves. Secondly, the state government shall say a report in both the houses of the legislature within 3 months of completion of an every calendar year. The state government may not include the details of matter which it believes may pose threat to the security of the state. So there has to be an annual report of the interceptions. Now, after interceptions and everything, let us proceed to the next part, that is confession. Even though there are provisions for recording confessions in the Criminal Procedure Code and the Indian Evidence Act, this act provides for different provisions with regards to confessions. The statement that is recorded before the police should not be recorded by an officer who is below the rank of superintendent of police, and the statements given by the accused to such officers are admissible in the court. Understand, confessions made before the police officers under MCOCA Act are admissible before the court. The police officer, before recording the confession, is duty bound to put questions to the accused which are not based on the merit of the offense, and give him time to think whether still he wants to continue to make the confession. The individual has to be made aware that he need not confess or made, and also he has to be made aware of the consequence of his confession. After that, he is removed from the custody of the investigating officer and taken to the higher police officer to record the statement. For example, an accused is desirous of making a confession. He would inform that to the PI. The PI first has to give him information regarding that this confession can be used in the court and it is admissible, and only upon obtaining his assent, after drawing up the letter, he should be taken to the higher police officer. Any confession that is made by an individual in front of a police officer not below the rank of a superintendent of police has to be in written form, and then only it shall be admissible in the trial. No oral confession shall be admissible, and if this confession can be admissible only against a co-accused, an abettor, or a conspirator, provided that all three of them, for example, if he is making confession against three, that is one co-accused, one abettor, and one conspirator, all three of them have to face the same charges. If they are facing different charges, then the confession will not be admissible. Every confession has to be recorded forthwith and sent to the Metropolitan Magistrate or the Chief Judicial Magistrate having the jurisdiction of the area of the police, and then the same shall be forwarded to the concerned special court. It is a duty of the magistrate to forward the confession within 24 hours to the special court. Now, what are the other provisions that are modified in this act and that categorize this act as a special act than that of the Criminal Procedure Code? Now, every offense in this act is a cognizable offense. This is the first feature. Then section 167 of the Criminal Procedure Code may apply to the offenses committed under this act, but they are subjected to modifications. For example, 15 days and 60 days wherever they occur shall be construed as 30 days and 90 days respectively. So let me tell you, where the police get chance for remand of 15 days in a normal offense under the penal code, here the police get a chance for remand of 30 days, and wherein the police get a chance to investigate the offense in 60 days, herein the police get a chance for 90 days. Now, if within 90 days, if the investigation is not completed, the police can apply the court and take permission, and a further extension of 90 days can be given. Thus, it can be said that under an offense under MCOCA, the police roughly get 180 days to file charge sheet before the appropriate court. The proviso that will be inserted after the provision as mentioned in the Criminal Procedure Code read out as below. Provided further that if it is not possible to complete the investigation within the set period of 90 days, the special court shall extend the said period up to 180 days on the report of the public prosecutor indicating the progress of investigation and the specific reason for the detention of the accused beyond the said period of 90 days. Section 438 of the Criminal Procedure Code will not apply to cases involving arrest of a person of the offence committed under this act. This means that there is no provision of anticipatory bail where there are accusants under the MCOCA Act. The accused while in custody cannot be released on bail or bond unless the public prosecutor has been given an opportunity to oppose the bail application, and when the public prosecutor opposes the bail application, the court is satisfied that there are reasonable grounds to believe that he may not have committed the offence, then only he shall be released on bail. Also, the accused is entitled to apply for bail in an offence under MCOCA only upon completion of investigation. Here you will have to equate that in a normal offence, when immediately after an accused is sentenced to judicial custody, there can be an application for bail, whereas an offence under the special enactment entitles the accused only to apply for bail on completion of the investigation, that is on filing the charge sheet. Now, what is the presumption of offences committed under Section 3 of the Act? This section is similar. The presumption is similar to Section 17 of the Act. When any unlawful arms or other materials are recovered from the possession of the accused, and that there are reasons to believe that such arms or material were used in the offence, or if the fingerprints of the accused are found in the site of offence or any other place or any other material in relating to commission of the offence, unless the contrary is proved, the special court will presume that the offence has been committed by the accused. The concept of presumption here is slightly different, because only on receipt of the material from the possession of the accused, the court is bound to believe that there was commission of the offence by the accused. If anyone abets or facilitates the offence or provides any financial assistance for the same, unless contrary is proved, the court shall presume the offence is committed by such person. Also, providing financial assistance for commission of a crime to a syndicate also amounts to an offence. Now, what is this Act also lays down for punishment to public servants who fail to discharge their duties. If a public servant renders any help in commission of an offence, whether before or after the offence is committed, or abstains from taking legal action which is empowered to, or intentionally avoids to carry out the directions of the court or any superior official, or also conceals the information, then he shall be punished to an imprisonment which shall be up to 3 years along with the fine. Now, what like these special enactments provides for punishment to the officers, it also provides for safety of public servants who have done their act in good faith. It says that no suit, prosecution, or legal proceeding shall be initiated against the state government or any officer of the state government for the acts done in good faith in pursuance of the act through any order or any rule issued under the act. Example, I'm giving an example here. If an officer disguises himself as a member of the crime or member of the syndicate and goes and be a part of the syndicate, say about for 3 months or 4 months, in order to unleash the activities, then this act should be termed to be an act done in the good faith, and no offense shall be laid against him. Now, does the High Court have any power to make rules with respect to this special act? Yes. The High Court, by a notification in the official gazette, make rules to alter, modify, or add any provisions of the acts relating to the special courts. What are the powers of the state government for making rules? The state government, if at all feels that it is essential to make a rule for the purpose of the carrying out this act, and then shall lay down the proposition before the houses of the legislature, and if both the houses agree for the modification of the same, such modification shall come into effect and shall be notified in the official gazette. If the houses disagree, then that the same shall not come into modification. Now, since I have given you all an overview of the act, let us now see a few case laws which have been there under this special act. The first I am dealing is State of Satyaprakash. It is Criminal MC 2138 of 2010. The facts of this case was the respondent, that is Satyaprakash, started criminal activity about in the year 1998, and in the earlier of his life, he was engaged in severe cases of snatching, robbery, and multiple cases were registered against him. On 30th April 2008, he along with 3 other associates were apprehended by the Uttar Pradesh police station, and in their possession one country-made pistol, 2 live cartridges, 100 grams of heroin, and looted property was recovered from his possession and his associate. It is further stated in the facts that in furtherance of this activity, Satyaprakash and his associates committed heinous crimes in the areas of Uttar Pradesh with an intention to gain pecuniary gains for their benefits. And on the basis of the allegations in the FIR, he was booked under the provisions of the MCOCA Act, and 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 he was also known to finance some other sources. Now, in the judgment before the Honorable Sessions Court, it was stated that and the MCOC Act provides for modified application of certain provisions of the Criminal Procedure Code. It neither modifies Section 300 of the Criminal Procedure Code nor it makes inapplicable to a trial under MCOCA. So, offences under the Criminal Procedure Code or offences under the Indian Penal Code have to be there along with the MCOC Act. The settled law states that the provisions of the MCOC are strictly to be construed. Thus, the Section 300 of the CRPC cannot be violated in an absence of an express provision under the MCOC Act. The trial court granted bail to Satya Prakash with the observations following that the sanction dated 16/1/2009 was given only on the basis of 6 cases, out of which 3 cases were under the Arms Act registered in various stations in the territory of Delhi, and the remaining cases were registered in the state of UP on the provisions of IPC read with Arms Act. Then the second condition which the court said, in the most of the cases shown in the charge sheet, Satya Prakash was either acquitted or convicted or was being tried separately. No proof of pecuniary benefit came forward, and hence he was granted bail. Now, since he was granted bail, the prosecution being aggrieved and dissatisfied by this order, they appealed the same to the Sessions Court. The High Court took into account the observations made by the Sessions Court and stated that Satya Prakash has no reasonable or probable defense and he is not likely to commit any further offense in case he may be released on bail. Giving any opinion on the facts of the case at this stage would criticize with prejudice the trial in the matter, and it is still in the infancy. However, it is a settled position that once a bail is granted, the same cannot be cancelled in a mechanical manner, and hence the Delhi High Court upheld the judgment of the Sessions Court. The second is the case of Zohra Sheikh versus State of Government of NCT Delhi, and the bail application number is 1481 of 2016. The main accused Sharafat Sheikh, PC of Police Station Nizamuddin, was suspected to trade in narcotics with his gang members in Delhi on a large scale, and was to come to his residence with co-accused Modi Salim having smack and illegal arms in his possession. The investigation disclosed that the main accused as well as the co-accused Sharafat and Mohammad Salim purchased a number of immovable properties and movable properties in their own name and the same in the name of their wives, namely Zohra Sheikh, who is the applicant in the instant case, from the funds allegedly generated out of the illegal trade of narcotics. It was also found that Zohra Sheikh was holding many bank accounts after her marriage, and the bank accounts were in Delhi and Mumbai. The applicant with her husband, co-accused Sharafat, and their families were maintaining a very lavish and fancy lifestyle. It was held that the applicant was possessing and had acquired the wealth and movable properties by facilitating the crime syndicate led by her husband Sharafat, and had therefore committed an offence under Section 3(2), 3(5), and 4 of the MCOCA, and hence the Sessions Court rejected her bail application. That she was not entitled for bail as per Section 439 of the CRPC. The Delhi High Court stated that as per the definition of abet in Section 2(1) of the MCOCA Act, prima facie case was established that the applicant accused appeared to be in possession of the movable and immovable properties derived and obtained from the commission of the organized crime syndicate, and hence her bail application was rejected and the order of the Sessions Court was upheld. Now, next is the case of Dinesh Bhundulal Baisavare versus State of Maharashtra. In this case, the accused, along with 4 accused persons, being a member of an organized crime syndicate, was a part of a group which took part in carrying out a dangerous assault on the complainant Amol Meher on 29/5/2015. Amol Meher, however, managed an escape, though he suffered grievous injuries to the person. On the basis of Amol's statement, offences under Section 307, 143, 144, 147, 148, 294, and 427, read with Section 149 of the Indian Penal Code, were registered, along with the Section 3, 4, 25, and 27 of the Indian Arms Act was registered. Charge sheets were filed against the crime syndicated head, and it was stated that the head of the crime syndicate was Gijraya Lonare. As the applicant was a part of the syndicate, permission was granted by the competent authority for proceeding against all the members of the organized crime as per the provisions of the MCOCA Act. Accordingly, offences punishable as per Section 3(4) of the Act were registered, and hence the accused applied to the High Court for the bail. The High Court observed that this is not a case wherein it would prima facie stated the applicant did not play a role in assault that was made upon the complainant on the night of 28th May 2015. It was seen from the statements of the various witnesses that the applicant was carrying a sword in his hand, and he got down from a Maruti Omni and he ran after the witness carrying the sword in the hand. Then there was also prima facie material to conclude that the last 2 charge sheets which were filed against the crime syndicated head made by Virender alias Girja Lonare, it was clear, and the 2 parameters prescribed as per Section 21(4) of the MCOCA Act, that is, existence of prima facie evidence showing involvement of the applicant, have been met, and hence the offence under Section 3 of the MCOCA was registered. The court herein held that they were decided for bail, and though there was a case, they were decided for bail, but since the bail was ruled, they were released on bail because the evidence that was available, that was enough to conduct a trial, but to keep them behind the bars was not entitled, and they would also be given a chance of a free trial. The next is the famous case of the Malegaon blast case, which is known to everyone. In this I shall be dealing with the case of Lieutenant Colonel Purohit, known as Colonel Prasad Shrikant Purohit. In Criminal Appeal number 1448 of 2017, the Honorable Supreme Court had granted him bail. Also, while granting him bail, the Supreme Court had immediately stated that he be reinstated to his post with immediate effect. Along with him, other co-accused, that is Sadhvi Pragya and one Deshpande, were also granted bail. Let me read out the extract what the Supreme Court has stated in their judgment. The Supreme Court acknowledged the variations in the charge sheet filed by the ATS Mumbai and NI. The investigation was conducted first by the ATS Mumbai, and thereafter it was transferred by the NI. The Supreme Court observed that a perusal of the statements of various prosecution witnesses recorded under Section 164 of the code by the NIA, it was revealed that the ATS Mumbai forced them to make the statements under the opposite section by threatening them to falsely implicate them in the case. In other words, and simple words, the witness had retracted their statement recorded by the ATS in front of NIA. Even during re-examination of a public witness recorded under Section 164, he stated that he did not attend any meeting of the Abhinav Bharat held at Bhopal, and he had never visited Bhopal until the ATS took him to the Ram Mandir Bhopal. The very statement was again recorded by Delhi by the learned Metropolitan Magistrate, where he confirmed the same. Supreme Court further observed that there are material contradictions in the charge sheets filed by the ATS Mumbai and NIA, which are required to be tested at the time of the trial by the ATS Mumbai and choose the version over the other. Liberty of a citizen is undoubtedly important, but this is to be balanced with the security of the community. A balanced requirement is to be maintained between the personal liberty of the accused and the investigational rights of the agents. It must result in minimum interference interference with the personal liberty of the accused and the right of the agency to investigate the case. The Apex Court, while dealing with this case, has observed that granting of bail should exercise its while granting the bail, the court should exercise its jurisdiction in a judicious manner and not as a matter of course. The law in regard to grant of bail is very well settled. Though at this stage of granting bail, a detailed examination of evidence and elaborate documentation of merit of the case need not be undertaken. There is a need to indicate in such orders reason from prima facie concluding why bail was being granted, particularly where the accused is charged or been committed of a serious offense. Any order of for devoid reasons would suffer from non-application of minds. It was also necessary for the court to grant bail. While granting bail, consider among the circumstances the following factors, that is, they are the nature and accusation and the severity of the punishment in case of conviction and the nature of the supporting evidence, reasonable apprehension of tampering with the witnesses' apprehension, prima facie satisfaction of the court in support of the charges. The appellant, that is Colonel Purohit, who was before the court at the relevant time of the commission of the offense, allegedly was an intelligence officer of the Indian Army and had refuted the claim of conspiracy on the ground of intelligence inputs, wherein he informed to his superior officers as well as and all the alleged role of ATS officials in planting of RDX at the residence of accused 11 clearly indicated the fresh grounds which persuade the appellant herein to take a view different from the case of the year. As mentioned earlier, there are material contradictions between the charge sheet between NII and the charge sheet by the ATS, and the accused herein has been in prison for more than 8 years and 8 months, and hence the Supreme Court was inclined to grant him bail, and hence the bail was granted to them. After this, there is another case of Prakash versus Pappu Hirji Savla, the state of Maharashtra. In this case, on 8th April 2019, a team of police personnel from Kolhapur's Karavir police station raided a gambling den of Salim Mullah. Police initially booked the accused persons under the relevant provisions of the Indian Penal Code and the Maharashtra Gambling Act, and the Maharashtra Gambling Act, Maharashtra Police Act, and the Maharashtra Prohibition Act. 2 days later, the police invoked stringent provisions against 40 people and stated that a gang of 40 people was involved in commission of this, and they were taking gambling. Hence, 14 of them moved to the Honorable High Court. The Honorable High Court, while deciding this application, stated that the court heard the arguments of the accused, claiming that they were not present at the den when it was raided, and they did not have any association with Mullah or his alleged organized crime syndicate. They further argue that on the basis of the material collected by the police, they can at the most have said to be committed offense under the Gambling Act, and since the maximum punishment of the offense is 2 years imprisonment, the provisions of MOCA should not be invoked. The Honorable High Court has held that though gambling by itself may not be an organized crime, however, an organized crime syndicate may take recourse to it as one of it if profit-making venture. It may earn some profit, support the activities of the syndicate. It may also indulge by the benefit in contract killing, abduction, dacoity, or other similar offences along with the gambling business. If the existence of an organized crime syndicate comes to the knowledge of the state for the first time while conducting the raid on a gambling establishment, and the investigation shows previous 2 or more charge sheets for cognizable offences punishable with imprisonment for 3 years or more, the police may take recourse to MCOC Act and complete investigation. Thus, the Honorable Bombay High Court herein has stated that the petitions which were filed by the petitioners were not maintainable, and stated that if any fact comes first time to the light while raiding, then the police are at liberty to invoke the provisions of the MCOC. The next is the case of Surajit Bhagat Singh Gambhir, and it is again the case in state of Maharashtra, wherein it was contended that whether anticipatory bail could be maintainable or not. 2 candidates who were contesting the election of the ZP and the Panchayat Samiti were being nominated and arranged a political dinner. It alleged that at the said party, liquor was served along with dinner to 2 brothers of the complainant who attended the party, and after the party they started feeling dizzy, and on 12/2/2017, since their condition deteriorated, they were hospitalized in a private hospital in Ahmednagar. They came to be shifted to the city civil hospital, and while undergoing treatment, they succumbed as an outcome of the consumption of liquor. 9 people died and 13 people had taken seriously ill and were required to be offered treatment. During investigation, it was revealed that the alcohol which was supplied in the party was manufactured in one Sai Baba canteen of the City Civil Hospital District, Ahmednagar. It is in this canteen of the City Civil Hospital which fell within the loop of the investigation. The present petitioner, that is Surjit Gambhir, on an excess being established, came to be roped in. Jagjit Singh Gambhir had formed an organized crime syndicate and engaged in continuing unlawful activities with the object of gaining pecuniary benefits for himself and other members of the gang. The Bombay High Court, while dealing with the petitioner's contention, stated that he was being falsely implicated in the said crime, and while granting approval and sanction by the respondent, there was a complete absence of application of mind, and according to petitioner, there was no nexus established between him and the crime register, and hence the provisions under the MOCA should be dropped. The court held that there is no material on record to establish him as a member of any syndicate, nor is it established that he was a participant in the commission of the offence, by establishing that he had knowledge of the happenings in the city civil canteen, which was allotted to him on paper, but which he never physically was administered by him. In the absence of mens rea, knowledge or intention, if the petitioner is subjected to rigorous of trial and with the stringent provisions he will be incarcerated in the absence of a provision of an anticipatory bail, and hence considering the provisions as per section 23 of the act, and seeing the article 21 of the constitution, the court gave him a no coercive action order. The next is the case of the state of Maharashtra versus Bharat Shantilal Shah. This is the case where an allegation was made, and the two responded as Bharat Shah and his associate were aided under the provisions of the MOCA Act, and case was registered against him. Being aggrieved by the said act, they both filed separate writ petitions in the Bombay High Court and challenging the validity of the sections 2D, E and F and sections 3, 4 and 13 to 16 and section 21(5) of the MCOCA. Respondent Bharat Shah also filed a writ petition of a similar criminal nature by other two respondents. The judgment of the Bombay High Court stated that the Bombay High Court held that the sections 2D, E, F and section 3 and section 4 are constitutionally valid. However, the High Court struck down the sections 13 to 16 as being unconstitutional and as being beyond the legislative competence of the state legislature. The High Court held that the Parliament alone has the power to make law in that regard, as provided under entry 31 of the list 1 of the 7th schedule to the Constitution, and already that the Indian Telegraph Act 1885, a central act, was holding the field. The High Court also struck down subsection 5 of section 21 of the MCOC, holding that the same violated the provisions of the Article 14 of the Constitution of India. Being aggrieved by the judgment of the High Court, the state appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court observed that one of the proven methods of examining the legislative competence of an enactment is by application of a doctrine of fit and substance. The doctrine is applied when the legislative competence of legislature with regard to a particular enactment is challenged with reference to the entries in various lists. In this process, it is necessary for the courts to go into deep and examine true character of the enactment, its object, scope, and effect, to find out whether enactment in question is genuinely referable to a field of legislation allotted to the respective legislature under the constitutional scheme. Where a challenge is made to the constitutional validity of a particular act with reference to a subject in the entry in list 1, the court has to look into the substance of the state act, and on such analysis and examination, if it is found that it is in the fit and substance, it falls under an entry in the state rate, but there is only an incidental encroachment on the topics of the union list, the state act would not become invalid merely because there is an incidental encroachment on any of the topics in the union list. The expression or any under the act appearing in the section is arbitrary and discriminatory, and accordingly struck down the words from the subsection 5 of the section 21 as being violated of Article 21 and 14 of the Constitution. The Supreme Court stated that we uphold the order of the High Court to the extent that words or under any other act we should struck down from the subsection 5 of the 20th. The Supreme Court upheld the constitutional validity of sections 13 to 16 of the MCUSA and struck down the judgment of the Honorable High Court. The decision of the High Court striking towards the end of words or under any other act from the subsection 5 of the section 21 of the act is however upheld. Therefore, the words mentioned in subsection 21(5) were held constitutionally invalid. The next is the case of the Ghatkopar blast case. Ghatkopar blast case, which is famously known as the blast in the BST. On 2nd December 2002, a bomb was placed under the seat of BST and exploded in the busy Ghatkopar station. The bomb was placed in the rear station near the bus in the rear of the bus station, which killed 2 people and injured 50. Ghatkopar, being the final stop of all the passengers, had just alighted and only last 2 passengers were left. There was not major injury. The people who were killed were those who were present in the bus station area. Later, the police also defused an unexploded bomb in another bus in SIPS Andheri area. The Mumbai police had originally listed 29 accused in the case, but could only arrest 19. Out of the 19, the court discharged 9 for lack of evidence. 1 died in Hyderabad, and other one was Khwaja Yunus, who died in the police custody. The remaining 8 were acquitted by a special trial court in the year 2005, owing to the lack of the evidence. There are many more cases which need to be seen, which I have mentioned in my notes, and those can be referred later.
The above video is based on my understanding of the laws in India and is explained in a way which will be easy for the layman to understand. The intention of this video is to help the common men and citizen understand their legal rights and remedies available therein. The video does not mean to offend, harm, insult, criticize any person living or dead or any community. The detailed notes of this video are published on a blog, the link of which is mentioned in the description box below. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe and click on the bell button to have more updates. Till then, bye. Thank you. Stay safe.